Spiritual GPS, how Jesus guides you through life's toughest storms. Life rarely announces when the storm is coming. It doesn't send a warning text. It doesn't knock politely. One moment the sky feels calm, familiar, predictable, and the next moment the wind begins to howl inside your chest. Your plans scatter like loose papers. Your confidence starts slipping through your fingers. And suddenly, the path you were so sure about disappears beneath the waves. In moments like these, people don't ask philosophical questions. They ask survival questions. Where am I going? Why is this happening? And most importantly, how do I get through this without losing myself? Storms have a strange way of stripping life down to its essentials. They silence distractions. They expose fears we didn't know we were carrying. They force us to confront the uncomfortable truth that control was always an illusion. The irony is that storms don't come to destroy direction. They come to reveal what has been guiding you all along. Long before satellites filled the sky and screens told us where to turn, travelers crossed oceans with nothing but stars above them. Sailors didn't conquer storms by overpowering them. They survived by reading signals that never moved, even when everything else did. The wind could scream. The waves could rise. The night could become terrifyingly dark. But if a navigator locked their eyes on a fixed point, they could keep moving forward even without seeing the shore. This is where the idea of a spiritual GPS begins to make sense. Not a system that removes storms, but one that speaks calmly while everything else is shouting. Not a voice that panics when you panic, but one that knows the route even when visibility drops to zero. Most people imagine guidance as a loud command. A dramatic sign. A clear sentence written across the sky. But guidance, real guidance, rarely works that way. In fact, some of the most life-altering directions arrive as whispers. They come as quiet nudges when logic says quit. They arrive as peace that doesn't make sense in the middle of chaos. They show up as restraint when anger feels justified, or courage when fear feels logical. And that is why so many people miss it. They expect guidance to feel obvious, but instead it feels subtle. They expect it to feel powerful, but instead it feels steady. Storms train us to listen differently, because when everything external becomes unreliable, the internal compass finally gets our attention. There's a reason storms appear so often in the stories people remember most. Storms are not just weather events. They are metaphors etched into human memory. Every culture has stories of floods, tempests, shipwrecks, and rescues. And across centuries, the most enduring stories are not about people who avoided storms, but people who found direction inside them. That's because storms reveal leadership differently. In calm waters, anyone can pretend to know where they're going. But in chaos, only true guidance holds. When panic spreads, when options disappear, when strength runs out, that's when the question changes from, "What do I want?" to, "Who can I trust to lead me through this?" Imagine a boat surrounded by darkness, waves crashing from every direction, compass spinning wildly. Panic sets in not because the storm exists, but because orientation is lost. Human beings can endure pain longer than they can endure confusion. They can survive hardship if they believe it has meaning. They can walk through suffering if they trust the direction is right. But when direction disappears, despair moves in quickly. That's why so many people feel exhausted, not because life is hard, but because life feels aimless. They are moving, but they don't know where. They are trying, but they don't know why. And storms amplify this feeling, because storms remove the illusion of progress and force us to ask whether we were following a path or just drifting. One of the most overlooked truths about guidance is that it doesn't begin when the storm starts. It begins long before the clouds gather. A GPS doesn't suddenly invent a route when you're lost. It calculates direction based on a fixed destination. Without a destination, movement is meaningless. And this is where spiritual guidance differs from motivational talk. Motivation tells you to move. Guidance tells you where. Motivation pushes energy. Guidance aligns purpose. And when storms arrive, motivation burns out quickly, but guidance remains steady, because it's not powered by emotion. It's powered by truth. There is something deeply unsettling about silence during a crisis. When answers don't come immediately, the mind fills the gap with fear. We replay worst-case scenarios. We imagine outcomes that haven't happened. We mistake delay for abandonment. But silence doesn't mean absence. In navigation, silence often means the system is working, recalculating, adjusting for variables you can't see. In the same way, guidance often feels quiet not because nothing is happening, but because something precise is happening beneath the surface. Adjustments are being made that don't require your panic, only your trust. Think about how storms affect vision. Rain distorts distance. Wind shifts balance. Darkness erases landmarks. What once felt familiar suddenly looks foreign. And this is exactly how emotional and spiritual storms operate. Pain distorts perception. Fear shifts priorities. Loss erases certainty. People you trusted feel distant. Values you once held feel negotiable. In these moments, guidance doesn't come by changing the environment. It comes by stabilizing the perspective. It reminds you who you are when circumstances try to redefine you. It reminds you what matters when survival instincts tempt you to compromise everything. One of the most surprising things about storms is that they don't actually create weakness. They reveal it. The cracks were already there. The storm just exposed them. But the same is true for strength. Resilience that never faced resistance remains theoretical. Faith that never faced fear remains untested. Direction that never faced doubt remains unproven. Storms don't manufacture character. They uncover it. And guidance doesn't shame what's revealed. It refines it. There's a moment in every storm where exhaustion takes over. The moment when fighting feels pointless. When rowing harder only seems to push you deeper into the waves. This is often when people make their worst decisions. They confuse surrender with wisdom. They confuse silence with defeat. They confuse waiting with failure. But there's a difference between giving up and letting go. Giving up abandons direction. Letting go releases control. And guidance often requires the second, not the first. Human instinct tells us to fight storms head-on, to overpower resistance, to force outcomes. But navigation wisdom teaches something counterintuitive. You don't fight a storm by driving straight into it. You adjust your angle. You work with forces instead of against them. You respect realities you can't change while staying committed to the destination. Spiritual guidance operates the same way. It doesn't deny pain. It doesn't pretend storms aren't dangerous. It teaches alignment instead of aggression. Trust instead of tension. Direction instead of desperation. The most dangerous storms are not the ones outside of us. They are the ones inside. Guilt that keeps replaying old failures. Fear that predicts futures that haven't happened. Shame that whispers you're disqualified from purpose. Anger that demands control. Anxiety that never sleeps. These storms don't announce themselves with thunder. They hum constantly in the background, draining clarity slowly. And because they're internal, people assume they must fight them alone. But guidance was never meant to be a solo project. There is something powerful about knowing you're not navigating blind. That even when you can't see the next step, someone already sees the entire path. That even when your emotions feel unreliable, truth remains fixed. That even when your strength fails, direction does not. This kind of assurance doesn't remove storms. It reframes them. The storm is no longer evidence of being lost. It becomes confirmation that you're moving somewhere that matters. Storms also reveal how we listen. Panic demands immediate answers. Guidance often invites patience. Panic shouts. Guidance speaks steadily. Panic asks how to escape. Guidance asks who you're becoming. Panic focuses on survival. Guidance focuses on transformation. And the voice you choose to follow determines not just whether you make it through the storm, but who you are on the other side. Some storms end quickly. Others linger. Some change the landscape permanently. And this is where many people struggle, because they assume guidance always leads back to what was. But sometimes guidance leads forward to what must be. Not every storm is meant to be reversed. Some are meant to redirect. Some are meant to dismantle paths that were never going to lead to life. Some are meant to break attachments that felt safe but were silently steering you off course. It's uncomfortable to admit, but many people only seek guidance once their own methods fail. As long as plans work, independence feels empowering. But when plans collapse, humility becomes necessary. And humility is not weakness. It's alignment. It's the recognition that wisdom doesn't begin with certainty. It begins with surrender. Not surrender to chaos, but surrender to direction greater than your limited view. Storms have a way of asking questions that comfort never does. Who are you when control is gone? What do you cling to when stability disappears? Where do you look when answers don't come quickly? And these questions are not meant to accuse. They are meant to awaken. Because once you see what has truly been guiding you, you gain the freedom to choose differently. Guidance doesn't always change circumstances immediately, but it changes interpretation instantly. Pain without meaning produces despair. Pain with direction produces endurance. And endurance shapes depth that comfort never could. This is why people who have walked through storms often carry a different kind of calm. Not the calm of ignorance, but the calm of experience. They know that waves rise and fall. They know that darkness passes. They know that direction holds even when emotions don't. There is a quiet confidence that comes from trusting guidance during uncertainty. Not arrogance. Not denial. But a grounded assurance that says, even if I don't understand this moment, I am not abandoned in it. Even if I don't see the destination, I am not moving randomly. Even if the storm lasts longer than expected, it is not stronger than purpose. And here is where storms begin to lose their power. Not when they stop, but when they stop defining you. When fear no longer decides your choices. When pain no longer owns your future. When uncertainty no longer paralyzes your steps. Guidance does not eliminate struggle. It redeems it. It turns chaos into context. It turns suffering into shaping. It turns storms into classrooms. The most remarkable thing about true guidance is that it never forces. It invites. It respects freedom while offering direction. It allows you to question, doubt, wrestle, and still walk forward. It doesn't demand perfection. It asks for trust. And trust grows not in calm seas, but in waves that test whether direction is real or imagined. Storms will come again. That's not pessimism. That's reality. But storms no longer need to be feared as proof of failure. They can be recognized as moments of recalibration. Moments when the noise quiets enough for direction to become clear. Moments when the external world loses authority and the internal compass finally takes over. And as the storm rages, as the wind presses, as the waves rise, there remains a steady signal beneath the chaos. Not panicked. Not rushed. Not shaken. A guidance that doesn't scream over the storm, but speaks through it. A presence that doesn't promise easy passage, but guarantees meaningful arrival. A direction that remains when everything else feels unstable. The storm may test your strength, but it will reveal your guide. And as that realization settles in, something subtle begins to change inside you. The storm is still loud, the circumstances still heavy, the questions still unanswered, but the panic loosens its grip. Not because the situation suddenly makes sense, but because you begin to sense that meaning is larger than the moment. That even this turbulence fits into a map you cannot yet see. Human beings don't actually need certainty to move forward. They need trust. Certainty demands full visibility. Trust requires only direction. And direction is often clearest precisely when the path is obscured, because distraction fades and focus sharpens. It's fascinating how the human brain responds during storms. Neuroscientists have discovered that when fear spikes, the mind narrows attention, locking onto immediate threats. This survival mechanism keeps us alive, but it also limits imagination. We stop thinking long-term. We stop dreaming. We stop believing anything beyond escape. And that's why guidance matters so deeply in storms. It pulls the mind out of tunnel vision. It restores perspective beyond survival. It reminds you that your life is more than this moment, your pain more than this chapter, your story more than this storm. Many people assume guidance means constant clarity, but clarity is actually rare in meaningful journeys. If everything were obvious, growth would be unnecessary. Depth would be optional. Faith would be redundant. Instead, guidance often works like a lighthouse. It doesn't illuminate the entire ocean. It gives just enough light to keep you oriented. It doesn't remove waves. It gives reference. And reference is everything when direction feels lost. There's a reason people often describe profound spiritual moments not as loud revelations, but as quiet assurance. A sense of being held when nothing else feels secure. A peace that doesn't erase fear, but sits beneath it. This peace isn't emotional numbness. It's alignment. It's the internal recognition that even if circumstances are out of control, purpose is not. And this recognition changes how storms are endured. You stop measuring progress by comfort and start measuring it by faithfulness. Storms also expose the limits of self-reliance. Independence is celebrated in calm seasons, but storms reveal how fragile isolation truly is. We were never designed to carry life alone. Guidance doesn't just point forward, it connects upward and outward. It reminds us that strength isn't found in pretending we're fine, but in admitting we're not. That vulnerability isn't failure. It's honesty. And honesty creates space for direction to enter. It's important to understand that guidance doesn't always align with personal preference. Sometimes it leads through discomfort rather than around it. Sometimes it allows loss rather than preventing it. This can feel confusing, even unfair, until you realize that guidance prioritizes transformation over convenience. It is less concerned with keeping you comfortable and more committed to shaping you whole. Storms, then, become tools rather than punishments. Instruments of refinement rather than signs of rejection. One of the most powerful shifts happens when a storm stops being interpreted as an interruption and starts being seen as part of the journey. When pain is no longer viewed as wasted time. When waiting is no longer seen as stagnation. When silence is no longer mistaken for absence. In those moments, impatience softens. Resistance relaxes. And openness emerges. Guidance thrives in openness. There is a deep paradox here. The very storms that threaten to break us often become the moments that anchor us most firmly in purpose. People rarely look back on the easiest seasons as the most meaningful. They remember the nights they cried and kept going. The moments they wanted to quit and didn't. The times they felt lost and somehow found direction anyway. Storms carve memory into meaning. Another truth most people don't realize is that guidance often reveals itself through timing rather than explanation. You may never fully understand why something happened the way it did, but later you recognize that it happened when it had to. That doors closed before greater damage occurred. That delays protected you from paths you weren't ready to walk. That redirection saved you from destinations that would have cost more than you imagined. In hindsight, guidance looks like wisdom. In the moment, it often feels like confusion. Storms also challenge our definitions of success. When everything is smooth, success looks like progress, achievement, visibility. But in storms, success looks like endurance, integrity, faithfulness, getting up again, holding on to hope when despair would be easier. These quieter victories rarely get applause, but they shape character more deeply than public wins ever could. There is a sacred tension that exists in storms. The tension between fear and faith, between what you see and what you believe, between what you feel and what you know. Guidance doesn't eliminate this tension. It teaches you to live within it without being torn apart. It teaches balance, trust without denial, courage without recklessness, movement without panic. Sometimes guidance feels like restraint instead of action, a stop instead of a go, a wait instead of a rush. And this is especially difficult in storms, because urgency screams for movement. But not all movement is progress. Not all decisions made under pressure lead to safety. Some of the most protective guidance you will ever receive comes as a pause. A moment of stillness in the chaos. A reminder that wisdom is not measured by speed, but by alignment. It's also worth noting that storms have an expiration date, even when they feel endless. Emotions lie about permanence. Pain convinces us that this is how it will always be. But storms, by nature, move. They shift. They pass. What remains afterward is not the storm itself, but who you became while navigating it. That's why guidance focuses less on escape and more on endurance. Escape solves the moment. Endurance shapes the future. As the storm continues, something else becomes clear. You are not the same person who entered it. Even before it ends, you begin to notice changes. Deeper empathy. Stronger boundaries. Clearer priorities. A quieter confidence. These are not accidents. They are the byproducts of walking with direction instead of drifting with fear. Guidance doesn't just lead you through storms. It uses them. And when the storm finally loosens its grip, when the sky begins to clear, when the waves calm, you don't return to who you were. You emerge more grounded. Less naive. More discerning. You recognize false comforts more quickly. You trust steady voices more than loud ones. You value peace over performance. Direction over applause. Depth over speed. Perhaps the most comforting truth of all is this. Guidance does not abandon you when you doubt. It does not disappear when you question. It does not withdraw when you struggle. Storms may shake your confidence, but they do not shake purpose. Direction is not fragile. It is patient. And so, when the next storm appears on the horizon, as it inevitably will, you won't need to panic the way you once did. You may still feel fear, but it won't own you. You may still feel uncertainty, but it won't paralyze you. Because you'll remember that storms are not signs of being lost. They are invitations to trust more deeply, listen more carefully, and follow more faithfully. The storm does not get the final word. Direction does. And when you reach the other side, you will realize that what guided you through the darkness was not just a path forward, but a presence that never left. And that realization changes how you stand in the quiet after the storm. The silence no longer feels empty. It feels full. Full of lessons learned without lectures. Full of strength gained without applause. Full of clarity earned through endurance rather than explanation. You begin to understand that storms don't just test faith, they teach it. They don't just challenge trust, they deepen it. What once felt like abandonment now reveals itself as accompaniment. You were never navigating alone, even when it felt that way. There is a subtle confidence that forms when you've walked through darkness and didn't collapse. Not a loud confidence that demands attention, but a grounded one that doesn't need validation. You stop chasing certainty and start honoring direction. You stop asking for guarantees and start recognizing guidance in small, steady movements forward. The frantic need to control outcomes softens, replaced by a willingness to walk faithfully even when the terrain is unfamiliar. Storms also rewire how you interpret fear. Fear no longer signals danger alone, it becomes a cue to listen more closely. A reminder to slow down, recalibrate, and check alignment. You learn the difference between fear that protects and fear that paralyzes. One sharpens awareness. The other clouds judgment. Guidance helps you tell them apart. It doesn't shame fear. It contextualizes it. There's a profound shift that happens when you realize that guidance doesn't depend on your emotional state. You can feel overwhelmed and still be led. You can feel exhausted and still be moving in the right direction. You can feel uncertain and still be aligned with purpose. This truth is freeing, because it releases you from the pressure of having to feel strong all the time. Strength becomes something you lean into, not something you perform. As time passes, you start to notice how storms connect. How the one you survived prepared you for the next. How lessons learned under pressure become instincts later. How what once required effort becomes reflex. This is how guidance compounds. It builds a history of trust. A memory of provision. A record of resilience. And when new storms arise, you don't face them empty-handed. You carry experience with you. You also begin to recognize guidance in hindsight with startling clarity. Moments that once felt like delays reveal themselves as protection. Closed doors look less like rejection and more like redirection. Detours make sense. Even losses take on a different weight. Not because they stopped hurting, but because they weren't meaningless. Pain doesn't vanish, but it integrates. It becomes part of the story rather than an interruption to it. There's a humility that storms teach which comfort never could. A humility that doesn't shrink you, but grounds you. You stop assuming you know what's best in every moment. You become more attentive, more prayerful, more open. You listen better. You judge less quickly. You learn that wisdom often arrives disguised as patience. And perhaps one of the most surprising outcomes of walking through storms with guidance is compassion. When you've been disoriented, you recognize it in others. When you've been afraid, you hear it beneath their words. When you've been lost, you don't rush to fix people. You walk with them. Storms strip away the illusion that life is simple and people are easy. They replace it with understanding. Guidance also changes how you define victory. Victory is no longer the absence of storms, but the presence of faith within them. It's not arriving untouched, but arriving transformed. It's not avoiding pain, but refusing to let pain dictate direction. This reframing is powerful, because it means no storm can truly defeat you unless it steals your trust. And trust, once rooted deeply, is difficult to uproot. There will be moments when guidance feels distant again. When clarity fades. When storms overlap. When answers don't come quickly. And in those moments, you return to what you've learned. That guidance is not proven by how calm the sea is, but by how steady the direction remains. That you don't need to see the whole path to take the next step. That faith is not certainty about outcomes, but confidence in presence. As life continues, you may find yourself becoming a signal for others. Not because you have everything figured out, but because you've learned how to stand when things are unclear. People notice calm that isn't forced. Hope that isn't naive. Peace that doesn't depend on circumstances. Your story becomes a quiet testimony that storms are survivable, and direction is real. And when you reflect on the journey, you may realize something that once seemed impossible. That some of the storms you feared most became the places where you learned to listen best. That the nights you thought would break you became the ones that shaped you. That the guidance you sought desperately was often already with you, waiting for you to slow down enough to trust it. Life will never be storm-free. But it doesn't have to be directionless. And that truth changes everything. Because when storms come, as they always do, you will know that beyond the noise, beyond the fear, beyond the confusion, there remains a steady guidance. A calm voice in the chaos. A fixed point in the shifting winds. A presence that leads not around the storm, but through it. And that is how you keep moving forward, even when the waves are high. Not because the storm is small, but because the guidance is faithful. And over time, that faithfulness becomes something you don't just believe in, but something you recognize. You begin to sense it the way sailors sense a change in the wind before the sky ever shifts. There's an intuition that forms, not from instinct alone, but from relationship. Guidance stops feeling like an external system and starts feeling like companionship. Not distant. Not mechanical. Present. A steady awareness that you are known, seen, and accounted for even in moments when you feel most unsure of yourself. You also start to notice how storms strip life of excess. How many of the things that once felt urgent lose their grip when survival and meaning take center stage. Titles fade. Applause quiets. Comparisons dissolve. What remains is simpler and stronger. Truth. Integrity. Love. Purpose. Storms clarify values faster than success ever could, because they force you to decide what you're willing to carry when everything else must be left behind. There is something deeply human about wanting answers more than presence. We want explanations that satisfy the mind, timelines that calm anxiety, assurances that remove risk. But guidance often offers something more sustaining than answers. It offers nearness. And nearness changes everything. When you are not alone, questions lose some of their weight. Uncertainty becomes bearable. Waiting becomes possible. The storm doesn't disappear, but its power to isolate you does. As guidance continues to shape you, your relationship with time begins to change. You stop demanding immediate resolution. You learn that some things unfold slowly because they are meant to last. That rushed clarity often produces shallow roots. That depth requires patience. Storms teach you that timing is not punishment. It's preparation. You may also begin to notice that guidance rarely aligns with fear-based narratives. Fear tells you to protect yourself at all costs. Guidance invites you to trust beyond self-preservation. Fear urges you to close in. Guidance invites you to open up. Fear isolates. Guidance connects. And in storms, the voice you follow determines whether you emerge hardened or healed. Another quiet transformation takes place in how you interpret strength. Strength stops looking like self-sufficiency and starts looking like faithfulness. Like showing up even when energy is low. Like choosing hope when despair feels justified. Like continuing to love when withdrawal feels safer. These forms of strength rarely make headlines, but they change lives. There is also a gentleness that develops in people who have been guided through storms. A softness that is not weakness, but wisdom. They don't rush others through pain because they know healing isn't linear. They don't dismiss fear because they remember their own. They carry authority without arrogance, confidence without cruelty. Storms carve this gentleness into the soul. At some point, you realize that guidance has been teaching you how to listen, not just how to move. To discern between noise and truth. Between urgency and importance. Between pressure and purpose. This discernment becomes invaluable, because life is full of voices competing for attention. Guidance trains your ear to recognize the one that remains steady even when emotions fluctuate. And then there are moments when you catch yourself doing something you never thought you could. Standing calmly. Where you once would have panicked. Waiting patiently where you once would have forced outcomes. Trusting quietly where you once would have demanded proof. These moments are not accidents. They are evidence. Evidence that storms did not steal your direction. They strengthened it. It's also worth recognizing that guidance doesn't promise a life free from loss. Some storms take things you wish you could keep. Dreams shift. Relationships change. Seasons end. And grief becomes part of the journey. But even here, guidance does not abandon you. It walks with you through mourning. It holds space for tears. It honors what was while still leading you toward what can be. Loss does not negate direction. It refines it. There is a sacred courage that grows when you trust guidance despite pain. Not the courage of bravado, but the courage of surrender. The courage to say, I don't understand this, but I will not walk away. The courage to stay open when closing off would feel easier. The courage to keep believing that meaning exists even when clarity does not. As you move forward, storms may still shake you, but they will no longer define you. They become chapters, not conclusions. Experiences, not identities. And this distinction matters, because when you stop identifying with your storms, you regain freedom. You are no longer the broken one, the lost one, the struggling one. You are the guided one, the learning one, the becoming one. Eventually, you may look back and see a pattern you couldn't recognize before. A line of direction running through chaos. A thread of purpose woven through pain. A consistency that held even when everything else changed. And in that moment, gratitude replaces confusion. Not gratitude for the storm itself, but for the guidance that never let you drift beyond reach. And so the journey continues. Not perfectly. Not predictably. But faithfully. With storms that challenge and guidance that steadies. With questions that remain and trust that deepens. With waves that rise and direction that holds. Because in the end, life is not about avoiding storms. It is about learning to navigate them without losing yourself. And when you learn to trust the guidance that remains steady through the fiercest winds, you discover a truth that storms can never take from you. You were never meant to find your way alone. And as that truth settles deeply within you, something gentle yet powerful takes place. You realize that this journey was never just about surviving storms. It was about becoming someone who knows where to look when the sky darkens. Someone who understands that guidance is not a last resort, but a constant companion. Someone who has learned that even when the road disappears beneath the waves, direction does not. Direction remains. Presence remains. Hope remains. What you've just walked through is more than a story. It's a reminder. A reminder that your life has meaning even in moments that feel confusing. That your pain is seen even when it feels silent. That your steps matter even when progress feels slow. Storms may shape you, but they do not own you. They may challenge you, but they do not define you. You are not drifting through life by accident. You are being guided with intention. And if this message resonated with you, if it spoke to a storm you're currently walking through or one you've survived in the past, don't let it stop here. Someone else needs this reminder too. Someone else is standing in the middle of their own storm, wondering if direction still exists. When you like this video, when you share it, when you subscribe to this channel, you're not just supporting content. You're extending hope. You're helping this message reach hearts that need reassurance, clarity, and peace. This channel is a place for those moments when life feels heavy and answers feel distant. A place where storms are acknowledged, not dismissed. Where growth is valued over perfection. Where faith, wisdom, and purpose meet real-life struggles. If you want content that doesn't just motivate for a moment but walks with you through the journey, then stay connected. There is more ahead. More insight. More encouragement. More truth to explore together. So take a breath. Carry this with you. Trust the guidance that has brought you this far. And remember, no matter how loud the storm becomes, you are never without direction. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for walking this journey with me.